Yeah, we don't do any intros or anything. We just start talking. Aaron was telling me about how. So he lives in Hawaii. I don't know if you're aware. You could probably
Hmm.
hear the birds and
I
the nice
wasn't
things
aware.
outside.
Oh,
Um,
that's amazing. That's why you're so tan. You got that nice complexion. Hawaii.
I was trying at the last minute. I realized, oh, I should really do this from like an outdoor location that looks like really Hawaii. Uh,
mm,
but my own backyard, it has this one corner that looks like super Hawaii. But
Yeah.
the problem is I can't predict when the gardeners are going to come. So there's like a 10% chance.
mhm. Your indoors looks Hawaii though too. Like I can like tell you're in Hawaii like with this background.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's not bad. I feel like my backyard can kind of look like it's Hawaii because all the trees in Miami are imported from like Asia. So it
Yeah.
has like that tropical vibe. But he was telling me that he went to go get that mic and you can't next day order anything in Hawaii.
Oh,
So he's
that
like
makes
at
sense.
Best Buy. And I was talking to me and Jay were having this conversation 2 days ago of like, okay, if we would like radically move somewhere, you know, like where in the world would we consider moving? And I
Yeah.
was like trying to come up with criteria to ask an LLM, being like, here's my criteria, what makes sense.
Mhm.
One of the things I came up with was if a new MacBook drops, how fast can I get it? Not because I literally want MacBooks right away, but I
Yeah.
thought it was a really good proxy to figure out, oh, where in the world is like really plugged in, you know, logistically. And one of the interesting answers I got was Singapore, which you know has the like the stereotype of being like a really high tech city, but on top of that, it's like the logistics hub for that whole part of the world. So anything there, you just can get immediately. Like there's no delays on anything. But yeah, Hawaii was not on that
Well,
list.
in Miami, you can get like same day stuff, right? I don't get that in the Ozarks. Like
Oh
same
well,
day
yeah,
with
like, yeah.
Amazon or
I mean, this is like such a what's the word? What's the word like problems when it's like a rich person problem?
first world
First world,
problem. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, first world problem. But yeah, we've just gotten crazy spoiled with the whole Amazon thing because in any major city, it's absurd. Like before, it was like, oh, you pay extra and then you get like the faster shipping. Now by default, they just deliver it to your door like several hours later, or like if you order in the evening, it's there at like 3 a.m. So we've gotten very very spoiled by all that.
Yeah, I don't get that. And then I guess Hawaii is even worse. That sucks. Yeah, I didn't think about that. But I guess if you're in Hawaii, like who cares? Who needs stuff, right?
Is
Well,
there an adjustment? Are you used to it?
yeah. I mean, it only comes up randomly, like when, it's unlikely that it's uncommon that I feel like I need it.
Mhm.
Um, but it's funny, Hawaii has one of the highest bounce rates in the world of people who move here and move back.
Oh,
Hmm.
really?
Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of times, like during COVID, I had a lot of people like from the Bay Area that were like, I'm gonna move out to Hawaii, and I'm like, okay, like, but just beware that like 80% of the people bounce, But, and a lot of it, a lot of it is this. It's like people get here and they realize, what? I can't get like whatever my heart desires, like the instant I want it, over to my door.
Yeah.
We're on a rock. Did you realize we're on a rock 4,000 miles away from anything?
This is like the curse of islands. It's like an island is always the best place to live, but the definition of the island is like it's on its own and everything else you need is outside of the island. So yeah, that's tough. But you've been there for how long now?
6 years.
Oh,
Nice.
okay.
Didn't
So you're
bounce.
like
I don't know what the technical like definition of bouncing is. I don't know how long you have to stay, but 6 years seems like not bouncing.
Yeah, yeah, we love it here. Yeah.
what's
Uh,
the
What island?
what
Sorry.
Yeah, I live on Oahu, which is like the ghettoest of the Hawaiian Islands. I guess depending on how you measure. But it also has schools and hospitals and stuff. So
Important. Yeah.
what is life like? Like what's like a day in the life of for you that's different than what other people would experience?
I mean, a lot of it's like little stuff, right? Like one of the most minor things, and I mean, you have this where you live, Dax. But like one of the most minor things that I love that's like super important to me is like I wake up every morning, I take my dog for a walk in shorts and slippers. Like it's a minor thing, but I love it. And there's beautiful mountains behind me, and the clouds kind of like wrap around the mountains, and I just
Mm,
it's. I mean, I live in a neighborhood, like a suburban neighborhood, so in some ways it's just like every day, like it's just everyday life. But you know, I used to live in San Francisco and I grew up in Southern California where it's warm. And the whole time I was in San Francisco, I freaking hated it. I hated the weather. I just couldn't, you know, because I grew up with like sun every day, you know, and so it never felt comfortable. And after 12 years living in the city with the weather, be able to go out every morning in shorts is like a huge luxury. But I guess like other sort of like, you know, everyday things like um, yesterday was like a really calm Wednesday, which is like where we live. We don't care. Like the weather is always kind of the same, but the winds vary a lot. And the winds matter for like water sports. So we really look forward to calm wind days. And yesterday was a dead winds day, and Abby, my daughter, and I went out for a paddle on a one-man canoe. That's what she does, like for her sport, for her school sport. And we have like local offshore islands that are like a mile offshore that are small like islets. And we paddled out to those, and we looked at the fish, and we like you know, we practiced. I made the canoe like especially hard for her to paddle by sitting on the back.
Oh, I see.
So it's, you know, I mean, like those are like every day tends to involve like outdoor like water stuff for us anyways. That's different from other places.
The reason Adam and I were both laughing at the beginning when you were like, you take your dog out for a walk in your shorts. That's very similar to how I describe my day to day, except juxtaposed the way you describe it, I sound like a total crazy person, because what I do every morning is I also love the sun. I love going out, getting the sun right away, except I'm like basically just in my boxers, nothing else. And I don't walk my dog. I blow bubbles for him in the backyard, and he just sprints back and forth for 10 minutes. So, you know, same. I totally get it. We basically do the same thing. That sounds nice, though.
I wear clothes when I wake up. Max's goal is how long in the day can he go without putting on clothes? That's what I
remember how annoying I was when it was cold for 2 weeks and I had to like put on like a sweater before going outside. Yeah, that does sound nice though. The water. I think what's cool about different places is like the hobbies like orient around like the physical environment. And I really should get into water sports stuff. I've been here for a while. I've just been too busy to like develop a hobby, but I really want to pick up something that involves that, because you can't do that in most places, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I talk about that a lot with my kids, you know, is like, and with other people who visit us, is like that I also find that really interesting how the lifestyle, like, you know, I mean, I guess it shouldn't be surprising, but I think that in, you know, like hyper connected, like online world, people just sort of assume that, you know, every place will be, in some ways they have this like deep assumption that life will be the same, but there's these like ways that it's different, and it has to do with like the physical environment, you know, like culture like adapts to the physical environment. And like, you know, Hawaii is like famous for surfing and blah, blah, blah. But where we live in Hawaii, it's always onshore winds because of the trade wind. So like 300 days out of a year, it's onshore winds, which is bad for surfing.
I see.
So people don't surf here on this part of the island. And what is the hobby instead is this either like kiteboarding is really popular here. Those sort of like wind sports, or
that's what I want to get into. Yeah, it's pretty big here too.
Move here to Canada. Or like canoeing, paddling. And so I always like laughed at these like old men who are into paddling. When I moved here, I'm like, I'm never going to do that. I'm going to surf, you know, blah, blah, blah. And like, you know, I did try to, but then it involved like driving 30 minutes every day. And then I like tried the canoe one day and I was like, oh, this is pretty fun, you know, and it's like unsurprising. People do it because it's fun, you know?
Yeah. Also, those people, like I follow a bunch of people that are like kind of in the fitness space. A lot of them are older. They are so ripped and all they do is paddle. It's like such a good workout for your whole body.
Yeah,
we go to the gym and we try to simulate it, right? Like
the rowing machine.
Pretend like like we're in a boat canoeing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a workout. You're out on the water. It's beautiful. You know, I think it's like the same reason that people like, you know, like backcountry skiing, you know, which involves a lot of hiking and walking and stuff. And, you know, mostly you're out in nature, and then there's like every so often there's a little bit of adventure too, you know?
Yeah. Nice.
That's making me want to go outside. We've spent the whole winter in the Ozarks inside, and it's just depressing. Can't wait to
literally
do
hibernating
outside. Yeah, basically.
All right, so let's do a quick little intro now that we're like, you know, 15 minutes in. So this is Aaron. Aaron's a founder of, is it Rossi Corp or is it Rossi Corp? I remember you were posted yesterday like laughing at people struggling to pronounce it, and that had me thinking about it.
I say Rossi Corp, but Rossi Corp is also correct. It's named after the Rocinante, which is Don Quixote's horse in that book, but it's also the name of the ship in The Expanse, the science fiction novel and
interesting
television series. And that word
is it a good series? Is that a good one? I'm very into sci-fi lately, so I need new ones. Expand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, The Expanse, the series is, I mean, it's an investment. You know, those books are big, and there's like 8 of them or something like that.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Yeah.
But
it's pretty cool. It's like they explore. It's like a future where Mars is colonized, and then there's like a third entity, which is all like the mining operations in the asteroid belt, and there's like a crazy political tie between Earth and Mars, and then like these belters, I guess I forgot they were called. It's pretty good.
Okay, I gotta write it down. Keep going. Sorry, I interrupted you so badly.
So people probably don't recognize that name, but they might recognize. I mean, they'll definitely recognize that I talk about it incessantly. So your company makes initially made RepliCache. That's how I met all of you, and then more lately working on Zero, which has been really fun. We've got it into production past couple of weeks. Adam just sitting there like wishing he had something.
I can't wait to learn so many things on this call. I don't want to be annoying, but like I have so many questions, and this is the thing I've hovered around just being close to you, Dax, for so long, and I need to just take the time to get up to speed. And I feel like a lot of people listening probably do too, because there's a lot of people that probably are like local first. Yeah, I've heard all this, like, and just never done anything with it, and like we all know we should. Sorry.
Yeah, it's this funny tight little circle, because the other day I posted, because I wanted to talk to a bunch of AI companies using SST. I thought I would get like 5 responses. We ended up getting like 30 companies that reached out, and a bunch of them were like, oh yeah, we're doing AI with SST, and also we're using Zero. And I'm like, this is such a funny little circle
bubble. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the reason I was mentioning that is I think the reason we got on this call was someone asked you a question about some of the previous things you guys have worked on prior to this, which I hadn't known much about. So we're kind of talking about like you telling a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story, so I never know like where to start or how.
No, just go. We'll definitely listen to all of it.
We had DHH on, and he talked for like 90 minutes straight, and we never said a word. So you can really do anything. It doesn't matter.
See it in the audio bars in our editor. It was just him talking, and then me and Adam just completely empty.
So you won't do that. So you're fine. Do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so one story I always tell is that I worked at Google for 10 years, and shit, my phone is like blinging in the background. I thought I put it on Do Not Disturb, but I did.
I can't hear it.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't hear it.
I'm actually gonna interrupt you already because I want to say one thing before you start. So I actually technically intersected with Aaron when I was like 15 years old, because I was a Greasemonkey user. And I was using it to steal gift cards from this site that didn't protect their URLs properly. So I like didn't know that there's probably a better way to do it, but I was like messing with Greasemonkey, and I wrote some kind of script that just kind of iterated through every combination of URL. And I think I stole enough for like $110 worth of $5 gift cards, and I bought an Xbox hard drive, and then I got really scared and I stopped doing it. So that was Aaron's work.
Making the world a better place. Love it.
Yeah. Go on.
So I after Greasemonkey, actually kind of got me the job at Google. I didn't work. I worked on Blogger for like a very short time. I got thrown off that project like within months. And like, funny story about that. But I found myself on this project, on this like group that was like had people that were supporting Firefox. So at the time Firefox was like not the biggest browser, but like a growing important browser. And it was really important to Google that there be like an alternative browser and that the web succeed. And so they were like putting money into supporting Firefox. They were paying people to work on Firefox, and they were also paying people to build extensions and stuff like that. So that's how I ended on that project. And one of the very first things we built, the very first thing I built on that team, this was literally like 4 months into my Google career, was we were like brainstorming ideas for extensions and ways that we could like support Firefox, and we came up with the idea of syncing bookmarks in history. So we wrote this extension for Firefox to sync your bookmarks in history between different Firefox instances, which is now like a major feature that like a lot of browsers have. And my friend, one of my best friends at the time, that worked at Google, made this side joke to me one day. He's like, we're going to be working on sync for the rest of our careers, right?
The foreshadowing.
That's really funny.
The funny thing is that like he was more of like, right on the edge of like designer and engineer, these types. And he became the lead designer of Chrome, and then went on to become the lead designer of Android.
Wow.
So got like, did really, really well. No longer works at all. Forget about the rest of his career. Never worked on syncing after that. So he learned his lesson. Yeah. So I mean, I guess like, yeah. So I worked on that little sync engine. And then at Google I worked on Gears, which was a way that we were trying to add sync to browsers as an extension, so that we could build offline Gmail. And then, I sort of came back to sync on and off throughout my career. And like after I left Google, I had this friend that I worked closely with at Google, and we were really inspired by Git, the version control system, and how it worked internally. Like if you've ever like looked at how Git works, like the UI is a disaster. The CLI is a disaster, like a famously terrible disaster. But the internal design of Git is just beautiful. Like if you're into software, it's just a completely inspired idea. It's just one of these like things that I feel like is like discovered, not like invented,
Right.
And especially if probably a lot of people listening to this have no familiarity with source control before Git, but like it was just this horrifically complicated thing, that didn't work at all, that was like really slow. And so we were really inspired by this, and having worked on sync like multiple times throughout our career and knowing how complicated it was, like we had this intuition, like what if you could have something that worked like using the same principles as Git, but it worked for like application data, and so you could have sync, that worked really well. So me and my friend Rolf, we started Attic Labs sort of on this idea, and we built Noms, which was a new database basically that used sync that was very similar to Git's internal design. But pretty quickly after we started the project, we got scared off the original idea of doing like application level sync because of conflict resolution. Because Git doesn't do conflict resolution. Git just like,
makes the user deal with it. Yeah.
And when we started looking at that, we like didn't have any great ideas, and we're like, well, maybe, just the core idea of like, syncing structured data without conflict resolution is like useful enough by itself. And this useful enough is like a theme I hope that we'll come back to like in this call, and it's something that I've like learned my lesson on, and I feel like I've learned a lot from you actually, Dax, about this. And so but anyways, I think that was a mistake that we made early on with Noms, and we sort of like we're like what can we get away with, rather than like what do people actually need, and so we started trying to take this idea and making like a synchronizing application database for it, and sort of like searching for a problem, that this could solve. And we built Noms, and it's like really cool tech. And we couldn't figure out like how to market it because we didn't start with a problem. We started with like a thing, and after like 4 years, like we built this really cool database, and the team was getting tired, some of the team. And so we decided to sell the company, and we sold it to Salesforce.
So just so I understand a little bit better, like this database, like how did it fit in to someone? Like, is it like ends up being the primary database for your application?
We didn't know, like
Okay.
we were like, I mean, it sounds so stupid in retrospect, and so cliche, but like,
I mean, like, we've all been in that exact situation, so it's very relatable. It just sounds so stupid when you explain it 10 years later when you're a lot smarter.
So like, we we were like, okay, what if you take, the way that Git works, but you store structured data instead of files,
Mhm.
Internally, Git has a data structure that looks very similar to a B tree, but it's not a B
Yep.
tree. And databases use B trees to be fast. So we're like, what if you combine these things, what happens, um, like it was a go, like basically what noms is it's like an embedded database, kind of like SQLite,
Okay.
written in Go. And it has this sort of weird data model that's not relational. It's more like a graph database, I guess.
Mhm.
And that was kind of like custom designed again because we weren't really, I don't know why we just went that way. We had some ideas we did have some ideas of how it would be used, and that caused us to build this unique data model. But also, I think we were kind of scared off by the relational thing,
Mhm.
And again, we were like, what can we get away with? I feel really embarrassed admitting this now, but it was my first startup, and
If that was your first startup, like
Not
that's
acquired by
pretty good.
Salesforce. Yeah, you're doing okay.
That's pretty good. You should have seen, like, it wasn't until like my fourth startup where I started to sound like somewhat competent. So
yeah, so it's this embedded database written in Go, and the sort of key innovation is this data structure called a Prolly tree that we invented, which is like a mashup of a B tree and Git's like internal content addressing system. Um, and you can, like, I don't know, you can use it like SQLite, except for the difference is that you can like really efficiently replicate it to someplace else. So
Right.
think of like Lightstream.
Mhm.
You can kind of do that, but it's like built on these like Git data structures. And we had a bunch of ideas for how to use this, and I think if we would have kept going, we could have like found something. But the interesting story is that like after we open sourced it, so like after we sold the company, which was really just like a acqui-hire, but after we sold the company, there was this other company called Dolt that came along, and they actually had an idea for how to like commercialize this, and
Oh, interesting.
they made like a successful like startup out of it. So they took noms and they made it into a relational database, like a MySQL compatible relational database.
Huh.
So they built this thing called Dolt that looks on the wire exactly like MySQL. You can use all the MySQL tools with it. You can you can literally store MySQL data in it and program against it like it was MySQL. But it also has this really efficient like one-way sync built into it.
Nice. So like, what is this power? Is powers like regular applications, or was there like a specific type of thing that particularly?
Dolt started out wanting to use it for like sharing data sets. Like their idea was that like, we have like GitHub for sharing code, and like at the time like AI wasn't really going, but like with like data science was like really popular, and they were like, you need a place to share like public data sets. So they created this thing called Dolt Hub, and they tried to like bootstrap an an ecosystem of people sharing public data sets on there. Like a big part of data science, my understanding is like cleaning, and like
Yeah.
it's not like the actual like
Science part.
Yeah,
It's not glamorous. Yeah.
it's like removing mistakes from data like manually,
Yeah.
So there is kind of I guess there is kind of a need for like a place where you can share these data sets. But then it also turned out that a lot of people wanted to use it like as part of workflows. Like they wanted an application database that like supported branching, basically. So like my understanding is that it's popular with like biotech, because they're like working on these big like genome data sets and they want to support like branching internally on
I
these
see.
data sets. And it's also popular, my understanding, with like game developers for the same reasons. Like they have these huge like asset, stores. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Makes sense.
that team has been going now for I think like 4 years, and they have this like crazy slog, right? They're trying to implement MySQL compatibility,
Yeah.
on a different database. It's just an insane amount of features, to just like crank out, and like bug for bug compatibility. And that was another team that I was really inspired by when I went back to do another startup. It's just like watching like how dogged they were at just like pursuing this vision, and how slowly it took for it to get traction, you know, because like, you know, initially like just nobody cared what they were doing, you know.
Yeah.
And they, you know, and they just kept at it like month after month after year, you know, and it built little by little. And I, you know, I realized like, okay, like these things, you know, they take time, you know, like people can't just drop what they're doing and use your thing, you know, like the day they hear about it, you know?
Yeah. 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 Especially in dev tools, like even if they love your thing, how often are they starting a new project? It's like at best, maybe a year from now, they might have the opportunity. So yeah, patience is huge. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. So you were inspired by them. I kind of had a similar thing with very similar mindset to you, because and I think this was just kind of how startups were framed and maybe are still framed. It's all about like ship the smallest thing possible, and like, you know, it doesn't matter if it's great, like, you know, you try to get traction right away. If it doesn't work, give up, move on to the next thing. That was like the vibe, especially like in that time. So that's like kind of how I thought about everything. And it wasn't until I saw Bun that this clicked for me, where I was like, his task is so clear. There's no mystery to it. It's like, you just need to achieve 100% Node.js compatibility. That's a task. It's very straightforward. It's just going to take a lot of brutal effort to incrementally get there. And I just saw how like something about that simplicity is nice. And then two, I saw the clarity of like, oh yeah, like if something can be created within a month, it innately only has 1 month of value. It takes 4 years to make Bun somewhat usable. That clearly is more valuable. So just at like a fundamental level, like that kind of clicked for me. And a lot of people talk about this. Like Paul Graham has something about just do things that are hard because it drags your competitors over the same path. So this idea has been around for a while, but yeah, it also took me a while to not shy away from stuff that looked too big and instead feel the opposite. Like now I get more excited when it looks like it's really difficult.
Yeah.
Because the easy things are never actually easy. You know, it seems easy. You go and do it, and it turns out, you know, it's not really going to hit the way you hoped it would, or like there's like a bunch of other people also doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you mean by hard too, right? Like my co-founder Raf at Attic, you know, he had I remember this day where we were looking at some problem inside the data structure, blah blah blah, and it, you know, I think we were going to try to scale up noms to like run on S3. We actually had this idea of backing noms by like S3, which is now a thing that people are doing. Anyways, we were looking at that, and we realized it was going to be really hard, and he was like, well, that's great, you know, like, because like hard we can do, you know, but there's and that was true, but like there's also this other kind of hard, this like really boring, like frustrating hard, where, you know, there's just like a million, like you're talking about with Bun, you know, or like we encounter this a lot at Rossi Corp with like making like stuff work with every stupid like tool in the JavaScript ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
like oh, yarn, like
for me, it's Prisma. Prisma has been the thing that's been killing me. Prisma plus Lambda has cost me so many hours. Like I've been more productive trying to like dethrone Prisma than like trying to get Prisma to like work right. Yeah.
I mean, like these tools are popular because they do something useful. So it's like I don't want to like crap on, you know, these tools, and like I don't know what it is about the JavaScript ecosystem in particular that inspires like 7 different ways to do every single thing, you know. But like you know, but it's just the reality, right? Like,
yeah, you just gotta get to work. You know, it doesn't matter what opinion you have. Like if you're not gonna just make everything work, your thing is just not gonna grow. And that's like another lesson I feel like I had to like flip my instincts on.
Yeah. So anyways, that was noms. And so we sold that to Salesforce, and I think like some of the team is still there. But like I stayed for a little while, not too long. And then left, and I experimented with a few other like companies, but I think I like still like really in my heart want to do my own thing. And I started tinkering with Sync again.
It's addicted to Sync.
Well, I mean, it's worth talking about that too. I mean, the reason why is because it makes really good UI, you know. And like I started my career as a UI developer, you know, and I like making things. I like making UI, you know, and making things really fast. And unfortunately, just the reality is that like all software today is client server, you know. So like when I started out doing UI development, I was making all these JavaScript widgets and stuff like that, and you could make those widgets really fast, but it doesn't really matter because they have to talk to the server, you know.
Right.
So you can make the menu drop down really fast, but then they click on something in the menu, it has to wait for the server to, you know.
Right.
It's just this like fundamental thing, and if you want to make really good UI, you need the data local, you know. And so that's why I keep coming back to sync, and I think that's why like the industry keeps like coming back and looking at sync every so often. Yeah, so I was like thinking about it again, thinking about noms and like, and I stumbled across this this paper. I think there was like a research paper called Calvin. I can't remember the whole title of the paper, but it introduced this idea of how to do a distributed database. It was like a competitor to Spanner, Google's distributed database. It was like a totally different domain, but it had this idea in it that was new to me. And that idea, I realized, like, could be used to solve the conflict resolution problem that we had in noms. Like, if we had that, we could add it to noms, and then noms could have been used to build like something like Zero's used for today, you know, or and that turned into RepliCache. So RepliCache at a very high level conceptually is basically noms plus this conflict resolution mechanism, like internally. Actually, like RepliCache doesn't use a polytree anymore, but when we started out, it used a polytree. It's this immutable B tree that allows you to like rewind it and fork and stuff like that efficiently. So like internally, RepliCache is forking, and that's what makes the part of what makes the conflict resolution mechanism work. And then the other part of it is like replaying functions on this fork. And that replaying functions idea, that was the idea I got from Calvin. Yeah, so we started building RepliCache on top of noms, but like noms is written in Go, and that was completely impractical for web applications, because like you can theoretically compile Go into like WASM or whatever, but the smallest binary is like 5
Massive,
yeah. So we rewrote it in JavaScript, or did we? No, I think we wrote it in Rust first. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember if we went JavaScript.
You have to take that detour. It's a little bit Prisma's doing. Prisma did that, and now they're going back to JavaScript.
That was a nightmare. So that anyways, we rewrote it, and then a little while later we ripped out the polytrees because they weren't really. We have this simpler immutable data structure internally now, and yeah, we built RepliCache, and it was like a lot more popular than anything we had done before. Like on my startup journey, like it was okay. Some people are using this, getting value out of it, and I mean, it became like fairly popular, like I think like I should have had the numbers ready, but I want to say like tens of thousands of like individual developers using it, like millions of end users you have used RepliCache, like without knowing, as part of the applications that they're using, and it lasted. We worked on that for like 4 years, so. It's like fairly successful. Our biggest customers were Cell. And they're still using it. And, like even despite it being kind of like at odds with their, marketing, like they get a lot of
Right.
So that like
it's for their comment system on the previews. Is that what it powers?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and like, I think that, I feel a little bit weird, like saying this, but like, people often tell me that that they consider RepliCache like one of the leaders or like the leader in this like fledgling like sync industry. So like that's cool, and we could have like kept going with that. But like, we just got this like continual like complaints and like struggles with RepliCache, like from all of our users who were serious about it. We receive like the same sorts of problems, and they were basically like, well, what do I do as my application gets more popular and there's more data in it? Like the RepliCache is kind of assuming this model of syncing all the data to the client. And there is ways in RepliCache to sync less than all the data, but they're really hard to use. And so like the easiest way to use RepliCache is to sync all the data. And what do I do if my data isn't like, if like there's complex granular permissions in my data, where like even syncing the right subset of data that users have permission to isn't even easy to do, And we just kept hitting this problem. And And along this time, like the local first movement was like gaining steam. And so a lot of people were like hearing about local first and like thinking, oh, I could use this for my client server application to like make it fast. You know, they weren't really interested in like the like data ownership part. They were interested in like making my application fast part, you know?
Yeah.
And so local first started gaining steam, and we were like, you know, at some point we were just like, again, like this design of RepliCache, it was like, we purposely, you know, we consciously tried to like narrow the problem. Like at the time I wouldn't have described it as like, what can we get away with? But like really, you know, if I'm honest with myself, you know, that's it, you know, like, you know, just trying to like avoid the really hard problem, you know? And so we like designed it in this way that was like, you know, like a smaller like subset, trying to lop off the majority of the problem, you know, which was this like partial sync, you know, and permissions. And so with Zero, I think like around like a year and a half ago, you know, I started getting like really frustrated with receiving this question over and over again. And seeing like the local first movement grow and seeing like the energy and excitement about using these tools. And like, there were other people in the space like who had interesting ideas, like this idea of replicating from Postgres using the wall was like really cool idea. And I realized that we could put some of those ideas together and like really go after this problem and solve it. And maybe do something like really general, you know, and bring this like this experience, you know, at the end of the day, bring this kind of UI experience and this developer experience to like the vast majority of software, you know, like we could make something general purpose, like the way that REST APIs are general purpose today, you know?
Yeah.
That was a really long story. So
no, that was great. It's just, I didn't really put it together how long you've really technically been thinking about this. In my head, I was just like, oh, Aaron's like the browser guy. Like he likes to do stuff with browser features, but it's actually way more specific than that. I think what's also really interesting, and like I love making this point, you were like, yeah, I'm a UI engineer. I wanted to make UI faster. And you ended up having to dig into like distributed systems, like the way like data is stored in like literal files, like, you know, all that stuff to make the UI faster. And people nowadays, it's so easy to just carve out this I'm a front-end engineer identity. But like, you're effectively a front engineer through this whole thing, but you have to do so many different things that, you know, technically don't fall under that bubble. So I think it's cool to like really see that in action over years.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a really common story in the sync and local first space. Like I would say the majority of people who I really respect in the space who are doing really interesting work sort of come from this background of like, you know, being people who work with the pixels, you know, and they're like, this is so frustrating. Like, why can't it be faster? You know, and then they hear about, you know, they hear about sync or they hear about local first and they start looking into it and they get really inspired and they become distributed systems engineers, like, to solve this problem.
Yeah. It's funny because I had the opposite experience, which leads me in a funny place. So I'll explain what that is. So I did a bunch of distributed systems work. And in that I ended up building something that did this kind of similar to solving this problem. It wasn't for web, it was for native. So we had a data model in our system. Any mutations to it would get synced to iOS and Android apps. And it kind of was very productive for our team. Didn't handle a lot of things well. But it was kind of my first introduction to that idea. And then I wanted to keep using that pattern just to speed. I mean, it's funny because we talk about this stuff like it's new, but native engineers are kind of more used to this pattern of like keeping the data locally, probably mostly because they have to deal with offline a little bit more. But like you're used to native apps, like keeping your data around and like being able to access it right away. But I shifted back into web and then I wanted to keep using it. So I started to explore, all right, how do I possibly achieve this with like everything that's out there? And I went on this like really crazy journey from discovering Orbit, which I probably come across, which is like a front end tool. And if your back end is a JSON API, it does some like kind of smart caching with the objects and kind of understand your schema. Try to use that, got to a certain place, hit a wall. Then I was like, okay, somewhere around this time, I did come across RepliCache. And I remember going to the website and I was like, no idea what this is. I don't get it. And then I moved on. I moved on to try to make GraphQL do what I needed to do. I ended up using Urkel a bunch. That also had some like caching functionality.
I remember
Hit a
Urkel.
wall. Yeah, hit a wall with that. Then I was like, let me go look at this RepliCache thing again. I was like, oh wait, this is what I'm looking for. Ended up using RepliCache, and then now I'm using Zero. And so with RepliCache, I hit the same walls where like the windowing I have to implement myself, and like some of the permission stuff, some of the error stuff. So again, I really focused on solving those problems. And now we have Zero, and I'm like, oh, okay, all the problems I've been looking for the past 4 years are now solved, which means the remaining problems for me are, hey, like making sure like the hover animation like looks right, which is just not where I came from. So I finally achieved what I want to achieve, but then I'm bottlenecked by like my like just front end detail stuff. So it's down to just CSS now. That's like that's what's limiting me to get to where I want. Yeah.
We joke about that like sometimes with Z-Bugs, you know, as part of building Zero, early on, we decided that we should have a dog food app that we are building, like that's driving the development of Zero for like a lot of reasons. Like one of the reasons is just like it seemed like poetic to me. Like I liked the elegance of it, like that, like all of these like local first and sync tools, they all make a linear demo because like linear is this famous app that uses sync that has this really great UX. And we made a linear demo with RepliCache, right? But it's a demo. Like we knew when we built it that it was a demo. And like with that word demo, there's like so much loaded, you know, there's always, if you're a developer and you see a demo of something, you should just take that to imply there is like some dragons hidden in this. Like you don't know which one, you don't get to know which ones they are, you know?
Yeah.
But you know, but there's some dragons that like the developer skipped over because it's a demo. Like and for us, like, you know, with RepliCache, you know, like some of those dragons were like fine-grained permissions, partial sync, and like, you know, a bunch of other ones like deployment, you know, and so we wanted to like make sure with Zero that we were not skipping over the hard problems, that we were not making that same mistake. I wanted to make sure that we weren't making that mistake again, and like that we were really building something that you could use to build real software. So like the best way to do that is to like build something real, you know? And then the other thing was like, we knew that Zero was going to be open source. And so we needed a bug tracker. And that meant like our only option was basically GitHub, you know, or GitLab, you know? And like, I just cannot deal with the fact that like, here we are trying to build like a sync engine for building things like linear, and we're using like GitHub. This just does not,
it's awful.
You know, like,
yeah. I literally sync my GitHub issues into linear and just use linear as a front end for GitHub.
Yeah,
that's how bad it is. Yeah,
we kind of considered something like that, but you know,
no, having your own thing makes total sense for the dog fooding.
Like it's an open source project, right? So there has to be like a public
view.
Yeah, and people need to be able to file bugs, and you know, and that's kind of interesting too, because like like linear, I don't know if linear doesn't support fine-grained permissions within a repo. So you can't create, to my knowledge, sorry if I'm wrong, linear folks, I've looked at this like multiple times. To my knowledge, in linear,
you can't create like a private issue now.
Yeah, like within like, and so, and also there's no such thing as public issues. Like you can't create an issue that's world readable. And I assume this has to do with like the design of the sync engine. I don't know if that's true. But like we really needed this for Z-Bugs, right? Because like it's an open source project, you need to be able to see the bugs publicly, comment on them, right? And because the bugs need to be visible publicly, that means they need to boot up fast. You know, like you can't wait 10 minutes or, you know, 5 minutes for the thing to sync. You know, that means you need partial sync, you know? So it's just really interesting to like build a real app, because it brings up these questions that real users have. Like when we were doing RepliCache, people would always ask us like, well, what do I do if I have like a public page that people need to visit without being logged in? And we're like, well, you can like, you know, whatever, you know, like, like, you know, but like, you know, but if we're building it for ourselves, right, we're not going to do any of those weird hacks that we were maybe suggesting that people do, you know, like we're going to be like, no, let's just like fix the infrastructure to work the right way, you know, so that we can do this.
Yeah. It's funny just having worked in, you know, building stuff for developers. I've had this experience so many times where someone mentions a problem to me and I'm just like, oh yeah, it's annoying. but then I don't think that much of it. Then I run into it, and all of a sudden it's like the number one priority, and I get it fixed right away. So it's just, yeah, like it's like that's just a reality of it. Like until you hit it, you don't really understand how important it is to fix. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I guess like, part of it is like we just develop, all of us just develop a skill for focus, right? So it's like, there's lots and lots of things that you can work on. There's lots of problems, right? And you naturally develop an ability to like focus on the one that you're working on,
Yeah. That's how you need some mechanism, because like there's always 1,000 tasks, and you just need some mechanism that orders it for you. And having your own product is a very good way to do that, because at least you're not making up, like working on fake stuff, which, as stupid as that sounds, like that's like the biggest challenge. Like you end up spending a lot of time working on fake made up stuff, and having your own thing kind of really focuses you. The posting demos thing, it's funny because I've always felt this way, where I'm like, if I'm going to post a demo showing something off, like it needs to be a thing that's in production, and ideally like even making money, so I can be like, this is like not just me messing around. And I remember once I posted a demo of our search, and it was powered by RepliCache, and it was searching through like 50,000 patients, and it was all instant. And I was, of course, in my usual tone, I was very annoying about it and made fun of everyone for their stuff not being this good. And so many people got really pissed off, and they started making these demos of being like, this is not even hard. Look what I can do. And every single one was just someone wiring an on key down to like a query to a server that hits Postgres and like round trips. And yeah, like when you just do that on a demo, when everything's running locally, you can guarantee that the end user is like not too far away from your back, and like all those different variables,
these were, like,
of course you can achieve that.
These were videos of Postgres running locally?
Yeah, it was all localhost. Well, first people accuse my video of being all on localhost, which is a great compliment. I get this all the time whenever I show off local first stuff. They're like, "Oh yeah, like now try deploying to production," and I'm like, "Bitch, check the URL. That does not say local first. It's localhost." Yeah, but yeah, a lot of people were just posting these like stupid local host ones. Some people did ones that were actually deployed, but again, like under perfect conditions, very hard to make something that looks similar, but an actual app with real world constraints. Like we had all sorts of weird problems of like, okay, this business had 50,000 patients to look through. You can't sync the whole patient because that's way too much data. You have to sync like a partial of it, and then when they click into it, you have to load the full thing in and then keep track of which patients are interested in. Like all those just things that come up when you build and polish a real world thing. So I really try to post stuff that's real world, and I expect people to recognize the difference. But people often don't. They just think it's like the same as any other demo.
Yeah, well, this goes to like something that also you and I have talked about, in DM about like marketing. This is another thing that I've learned a lot about like over my startup journey quest. That like, I mean, it's not really people's fault that they don't see the like, the URL is production, or they don't like imply that like, oh, this means it's real or whatever, that they don't get the message that you're sending them. I mean, people receive like thousands of messages every day, right? Trying to convince them of something, and like, and they are looking at it with like 10% of their brain, like it's just really hard to like get a message through, It's not really anyone's fault, like it's just the way the world is, like, so like, a big part of marketing, I like realized there's like something actually, I grew up as like a skater and like, in Southern California. So I grew up like very like anti-marketing, and like anti-advertising. But I realized there's actually something kind of like, there's actually kind of a craft to it that is really interesting, of like, if you have a product that's good and that it's good and that it can help people, marketing is just like finding a way to get them to know that, like finding a way to get this message to them, like, and there's a lot of interesting craft to that, and like, so I mean, it's like if they don't receive your message, like it's not like something has gone wrong. That's like the expected case,
Yeah, no, it's true. And to be fair, like it's always a vocal minority. Like that post had a crazy amount of likes on it, and then maybe like, 1 or 2 dozen people that replied in a way that I found annoying. So like it's always like, it always ends up working that way. But yeah, the whole marketing thing is super interesting too. Like I'm similar in that I just had this, in hindsight, naive view of things of being like, well, if the product is good enough, the marketing doesn't matter. And then you go to do something real and your numbers are flat and you're like, shit, there go all my ideals. It's totally tested by reality, and it turns out like I'm just wrong. So again, my brain just flipped on that as well. And I was like, I just need to do this marketing thing because it's not this negative thing that's tricking people into something. It's like this totally other thing that the reality is you just can't operate without. It's been fun getting into all that stuff.
But I think there is like a sort of like a subtle twist on it, which is like, if the product is good enough, then the marketing will work. The marketing will work. Yep.
You know, yep.
like, you know, and you know, you have the opportunity to do, at least I like, you know, you have the opportunity to do like really interesting, like creative marketing, you know,
yeah,
because you're like sort of riding on top of this like foundation of a good product, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because people come to me a lot being like, oh, can you give me like marketing advice for this thing? And the thing that I always have trouble telling them is like, I don't like your product. Like, I don't think it's good. So like, I can't really come up with.
Dax, do you have a hard time telling somebody that their stuff is bad? That's hard for you?
To their face directly when they're coming to me with such hope in their eyes. Like, yeah, you know, it's just like, if I don't like the product, I just can't, the creative part of my brain isn't activated. You know, it has to align properly. And like, yeah, it just won't work. Like, you can copy paste what someone else did that worked. And if your product isn't hitting, it's just not, yeah, it's not going to work. There's like it's not two things at the end of the day. Product and marketing, it's all just one thing. Like, you pick the products that work well, that can be marketed well. So your marketing message can work well. Yeah.
That's like, it reminds me of this like other sort of like this other sort of like phrase that I keep in my head, like, is that like with marketing, like novelty is like half the battle, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, again, it's like you have to get through to people, you know? So like, you know, actually copying what somebody else has done is like the opposite of like what you should do for marketing, which is like a little bit counterintuitive. Like you know, like, people get really good at noticing patterns, and I think what they're really tuning into is like noticing low effort, you know?
Yep.
Which goes back to what we were talking about, right? Like, as humans, we're like bombarded with messages all the time, right? We're trying to filter them out, and we develop patterns for like which messages are likely to be useful. And like, one of those heuristics is like the effort that went into sending the message, you know?
Yeah.
You know, and if the message is just like a copy of something that's been done over and over again, that's like a really easy to detect pattern that is low effort, right?
Yeah.
And so like, go ahead.
I would say it's we can probably all, if we sit and think about it, we can actually probably all observe within ourselves, because I've been around long enough where I've seen things that the first time I looked at it, it looked incredible, and then very quickly I started looking at it and it literally looked ugly to me. So more recent example is AI generated images. There was a time where we were like, wow, this is insane. And now it's been like maybe like a year of us seeing it. We like can instantly tell it's AI generated, and our brains just think it's ugly. But there's like no objective truth to like what looks good or what doesn't. It's just like whether you've seen it enough times already, which is like kind of mind blowing.
Say like monochrome websites, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, well, my first thought was actually the linear website, where I'm like, when I first saw that, I was like, wow, it looks good. And now when I see one of those things, it's like a insane negative reaction I get. And sometimes it's not even low effort. There was a recent case where I think they even posted, they spent like $100,000 on his landing page, and like looked so like that like crazy like nightclub flashy glossy reflective thing going on everywhere, but just looked like a variation of linear, and it looked bad to my eyes. So
yeah. Well, it's like, you know, it can cost money and still be low effort, you know? Like,
that's true. They just hired someone to copy the thing. Yeah.
I've just been listening to you guys, and I just want like the people who can nerd out about this stuff to like enjoy the content. But I have so many like super dumb questions, and it might be helpful for the people like me. Yeah.
Yes, go.
So I am a front end engineer who did not go further in life and I didn't live up to my potential, I don't know what a B tree is. I can start there. What is a B tree? But that's probably not very interesting. I want to know, like, zero, what part of, because I'm not using it. Dax is so plugged into this stuff. What part of my stack, like it's a library I install into my front end application,
Yeah.
and it replaces my API? It replaces my database? How
Yes.
does it all fit?
Yeah. It's Zero and in more general, all sync engines, they take over the network communication between the client and the server. You know, so like 100% of people who are listening to this are building a client server web app, right? You got code on the client, which is, you know, HTML, JavaScript. You know, you got code on the server, right? And the data is on the server, and the UI is on the client, and you need some way for them to talk to each other. And the sort of classic way to do this all the way back to the 90s is like the 3-tier architecture, right? With like APIs, HTTP APIs that connect them, right? And we've gone through a few variations of HTTP APIs. There was like, I don't know, if you're really old like me, you've got like SOAP.
SOAP, yeah.
Oh yeah, wow.
I like SOAP. I liked it because it integrated nicely into Visual Studio, and you could just like click it and see everything.
Never heard anyone say they like SOAP. Sorry.
I've never heard that either.
I liked it.
I'm reevaluating like as we speak. Things are like moving. I mean, like
Jack's like SOAP and he likes zero. That's a bad sign.
Yeah. So then, you know, we had what was the one? There was a short-lived one after that, and then you know, we had REST, which lasted a really long time and still going strong. And we also had like GraphQL, right, which was another variation on this idea. I don't know, I guess you could say like TRPC is like another version, right? There's a lot of smaller ones, right? But they're all sort of like based on this idea at the bottom of like HTTP APIs, you know. So the client makes at the end of the day, it makes a fetch request and sends some data to the server and gets a response, right? And sort of the fundamental problem is like, you know, if you want the UI to do something, the user presses something, and in order to do that, it needs data from the server. It has to wait for that request to go to the server and send the data back. And like sort of at a minimum, you're bounded by speed of light, which is kind of cool. We're like, you know, we're building things where we care about the speed of light, you know, but like, you know, for a lot of practical reasons, databases usually have to be centralized. There's a lot of people that have been hopeful about like distributing databases, but there's really hard technical problems to distributing databases. And there's also really hard like political problems to distributing databases.
Right.
And so for a lot of reasons, databases just end up often being centralized. Usually they're centralized. So that just means like by definition, there's going to be people, the majority of people on Earth are going to be far from your database. And the speed of their UI is going to be limited by the speed of light. But that's just the beginning. Like if really we were limited by speed of light, like that'd be great, you know? Like the distance, like I think the maximum distance from like any 2 points like on Earth round trip is, I don't know, maybe 300 milliseconds or 400 milliseconds, something like that. You know, it's not great. It's not great. It's not instant, but you know, that would be fantastic if like our UIs were maximally 400 milliseconds late. You know, but that is not what we experience. You know, what we experience is UIs that are like 2 seconds latent, you know? And like, why is that? It's because like the database, the application server, when it finally receives this request, is doing a bunch of work, and that work takes time. It's because often the UI is doing many requests to get data, right? It's not doing one, you know, it's like you click on something in the UI and then like 10 requests happen, you know, one after the next. And so like, in order to make this better, in order to make these UI better, like it's kind of funny, but we have to get the data to the client before the user needs it, you know? And that's what sync is about. That's what sync engines are about, is they're about continually pushing data from the server to the client ahead of time. So that the data is there on the client when the client needs it, and it can just read it locally from SSD, which is instant. And so this is all a very long way of answering your question, which is it takes over GraphQL and REST. And so you have a library in your client that you talk to directly that provides an interface that looks like a database. You've got queries, you know, you can do full arbitrary queries with like, you know, joins and subselects and filters and someday aggregations and, you know, everything. And then, but that database is like an illusion. there is data locally, but like it's continually being updated by the server who's pushing data to the client so that it's there when you need it.
And so you have like a package that you also run and install on your server, presumably
Yes.
to run like a zero server, or no?
So
Go ahead.
what I'm super into about Zero is, to me, it almost feels like something in the same level as Redis, where like everyone knows that they have a database and an application server front end, and like maybe they add in Redis to like provide caching in front of the database when there's too much load. This is kind of like, so Zero is a standalone server that's kind of like Redis in that it's like a cache for your database, but it's entirely optimized for the client to be front ends. So you can deploy these servers around your database. And what I'm really excited by is even in other regions, right? So you can have your main database in US East 1, and you can have a Zero replica in US East 2, just serving the users there. It's like taking over the responsibility of like a read replica, but it's like a read replica optimized for the sync engine purpose. So I can see how this just becomes a default thing that everyone just deploys around their database.
Yeah, so you have the client, you have this server that we call Zero Cache, that is basically a read replica, like a very fancy read replica, and
Your database.
Of your database, yeah. And like a read replica, it replicates your data into like its own storage, right? But unlike a read replica, like Redis is a cache, right? There's like a difference between a cache and a replica. The words are used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Like, like a replica has like a correct snapshot of the database, at any point in time. A cache just has some random subset of it that's been requested, right? So it's Zero Cache is a replica. It sits in front of your database, but it also
any kind of database, or like you guys support certain
currently
databases?
only Postgres, but the way that Zero Cache has been designed, it can work with other databases. And like, in fact, we have like an experimental version of Mongo up and running.
It just requires any database with a change stream, so it can consume updates in real time and stay up to date. Yeah.
Which, like, most databases have something like this for read replicas, because they need, right? So you have the Zero Cache, and the Zero Cache also replicates data to the client. So you've got your primary database, you've got Zero Cache, which is a replica in the server, and then you have a subset of that data that gets pushed to the client and actually replicated to the client, so that you have a consistent snapshot on the client. And then you read against that partial subset that you have on the client, you render instantly. And since you're continuously replicating to the client, whenever any data changes on the server for any reason, it gets pushed to the client, and the client reactively updates. And so you get like real time out of it for free, and you get instant UI. And then as like a little flourish on top, we also allow mutability to the local data. So you can change we have an API where you can change the local data, and those changes get pushed to the server, and they use RepliCache's conflict resolution that we talked about earlier to resolve conflicts. And so the end result is like you have an API that looks like a database on the client, and you can do arbitrary queries to it, and those queries are usually instantaneous. We'll get back to the usually maybe in a second. But like the vast majority of the time, those queries are instantaneous. The queries update reactively when data on the change of service, and you can change the data locally. All the queries that are open on the client, they update automatically instantly when you
kind of like that's like a React query kind of feeling, kind of experience. Does that make sense? Like it's like invalidating the local data whenever you change it.
Exactly. It achieves the same thing, except you get to just give it normal queries. You're like,
you're just interacting with the database.
Select from users where time created is within the last week, and that's just a view. And any changes that gets updated, any mutations that would have affected that query, get updated optimistically. It makes your front end so stupid. Like,
it sounds amazing.
The front end side of it is just like it's so dumb. It's like you barely need a framework at this point.
Also, you don't need the use optimistic. Like you don't need to write like an optimistic version.
Everything is optimistic. It's just
because it understands the exact thing that's being mutated.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question about like?
No, it does. It sounds very nice. So that Zero Cache, the server part, you can put those anywhere, and they're sort of like mitigating the issue of the distance between your users and your database, because they're constantly being updated from the database.
Well,
that make
really,
Yeah.
really that. Go ahead.
So even if you don't do that, it's probably fine. Like right now, we
Yeah, it
just
doesn't
have
really
the zero
matter
cache.
because you send the data to the client ahead of time.
Yeah. But if you really want to push things and you want to say like, I want it to be even faster across the world, like, yeah, you can have zero cache deployed. It's the same logic you would put a read replica in another region. I think for me now, I'm just like, yeah, my issue with read replicas is like, they're still very annoying to deal with. Like you can do a read replica of Postgres, but then like now you need an API server there. But then like writes still have to go to like the primary data. Like all that stuff is just a lot. Whereas
and I
with
realize
this,
that's not the thing I really care about. I mean, I'm like getting into stuff. Like what I do care about, I guess, questions I would have is like, well, the first one would be if you have a lot of data, and I think you said you can partially send down data, so you can choose for like given pages, I guess, or routes. You can choose to like only send certain data down. Is that the idea?
Oh, this is the part that I love the most. I'm so
yeah.
I mean, so it's query based. At the end of the day, you have a query API on the client. You do a query, and so the data that backs that query is what gets synced to the client. Like we take that query and we send it to the server, and the data that's needed to answer that query is the data that gets synced to the client. And then you do another query and that data gets synced to the client. And that's just how it works. Like all the queries that you have open are the data that's getting synced. So you control what data gets synced by what queries you make. You're in complete control, and you have the full power of a query language to do that.
When you say a query language, is it SQL?
It looks SQL-esque. Yeah.
It looks, yeah.
And it's on the front end. This is all the front end that you're writing these.
Yeah, it looks like it's inspired. The design was inspired by Kaisley, if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yep. The thing that's really cool is the way this actually maps down to like component-based frameworks, because like a component-based framework is you just have like nested things, right? Like when you land on a page, the outermost component loads. So any queries you put there will get loaded right away. But then when you click into stuff, like the inside changes, right? So let's say you land on the page, you have like a header with like the user info. So of course the user info is going to be synced right away. But then if you navigate to a deeper component, there might be queries in that component, right? That won't sync right away, but once you've navigated in there, then it'll start syncing. So it like very elegantly maps back to you don't sync stuff until the user's shown interest in it. Because unless they clicked in there, like that query would not have loaded and would not have started being tracked. And the reason we switched, so we didn't plan on switching the SC console over to 0 because we have a working RepliCache, it's fine. But then we had a situation, a feature where we wanted to show you the diffs of every single SC deploy that's ever happened. Syncing all of that ahead of time is way too much data. But it fits naturally with, let's just wait till you go into a specific deploy to look at it to then sync it. And that's kind of what forced our transition to moving to 0, because implementing all that on top of RepliCache manually, it would have been a subpar equivalent to what 0 can already do. So now we're like really excited just to move everything over. Because now that part of our app is like really nice and the rest of it now looks worse by comparison. But yeah.
Well, I'm going to dig in. My main job, like my primary day job, we use Postgres, so I could actually start poking around.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting for you because I don't like immediately know if
it's
there's like a good
use case is like very like antithetical to local first, I feel like. But then I think about like it's when you talk about it, actually you should do both things. Like I feel like you should probably still use it for any of the interactivity stuff. There's just like our experience is slow and it could be fast. So it's kind of like you got to figure out how to do both things. We have to serve a million clicks from Google every day, but we also need to figure out how to make the people who stick around and use our app a lot make it fast. Like we kind of just have to do both, I feel like.
Yeah, there's no downside. There's no downside with having a page that's entirely public powered by 0. Like it'll still work.
Well,
that's what's nice about this model.
Like cost downsides for I don't know what your day job is, Adam, actually. But like, the server is like more expensive to run than like, I don't know, like a
normal web server.
Yeah, if you go look at his Aurora bill, you're gonna be like, never mind, because whatever they're paying for Aurora is.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the compute, I guess.
So Adam's the founder of StatMuse, which if you're not familiar with, it's like the sports statistics source for like all sports, or not all sports, but like most of the sports. And they get like a crazy amount of traffic, and it's mostly public mostly public traffic, but they also have
mostly,
like power users that are like
Yeah.
logged in and doing more intense stuff.
I mean, I'd like to like dig into it. I mean, the sort of like been trying to think about how to talk about this. I actually need to do a blog post about this or something like that. Yeah, we launched Zero Alpha right before Christmas. So now it's been just about 2 months that it's been public, and so we've gotten a lot of interesting feedback. People are already starting to use it in production. Thanks, Dax. And you know, like I think like, you know, we decided, you know, as we talked about a little bit ago, to take on this really hard problem. You know, like some of the stuff we're doing is like, you know, like kind of like leading edge, like software engineering, you know? And
E-trees.
so,
I mean, that's it.
multiple times. And you know, it's like, we didn't talk about this at all, but like what makes Zero possible is this new query engine that we wrote. We wrote our own query engine from scratch. Like so the API is Kaisley like inspired, but it doesn't bottom out at SQL. Like we have our own query engine that runs it. And we had to do that in order to make this work, in order to make this efficient. This is why we didn't do this way back with RepliCache. And this is all built on this like theory of databases called IVM, incremental view maintenance, which is like pretty bleeding edge stuff. So this is all to say, like, we're going after like this really big problem here. You know, I think what Bun is doing is really inspiring too. And like, you know, I would kind of put us in that category of people who are tackling a really hard problem. And it's going to be a lot of work. And like initially, like today, you know, like Zero is a good choice if you are willing to run your own servers, if you're willing to run Dockerized like servers in AWS, and you have like, you know, enough skill and energy and need to like deal with all the configuration crap of like running AWS, or if you want to use SST. And you know, it's fairly expensive to run. I have to like put together like estimates of like what the minimal like deployment looks like, you know, and there's sharp edges both in API, in bugs, in like cost, all kinds of stuff. That's the reality. But like the value, I think, you know, it's already valuable for like a surprising amount of applications. You know, it's already like a really useful tool for all kinds of products. Like we have, you know, we probably got like a dozen people running in production now, and like we get feedback all the time about like how like amazing the experience is, and like people who are excited about the vision. So I have to find a way to like talk about like the vision of where we're going, you know, and the reality of like where we are right now, so people can like understand like whether it's the right time for them to jump in or not, you know?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think just seeing how much work it is also kind of interesting. That kind of communicates a value. Like, I mean, even just the stuff that I'm aware of, which is just related to, it's like a subset of all your problems. It's the ones that I've run into, but yeah, like eventually, like, you know, this cache needs to be sharded. Potentially maybe like the each cache server isn't replicating 100% of the data. Did Adam just leave?
Yeah, he waved.
Did he say it to go?
He waved.
Oh, did he message me? Okay, I guess Adam had to drop off, but yeah, the sharding plus like, you know, this idea of can each zero cache only replicate a subset of the data? What does it look like when there's like terabytes of data in your database? I'm also very surprised. I think I'm going to infinitely be surprised by this, but like you said, like right now, it's the bar of being able to actually use it is definitely higher than where it will be. I'm shocked how many people still do it anyway. Like I'm surprised by how many people I see in there, like figuring out all this container stuff and like, you know, actually feel like this is worth my time to, you know, figure all this stuff out, given how bleeding edge it is. Like I'm like working on deployment stuff. So I'd like spend all my time with this stuff. And even then I'm like running into stuff I don't know. But yeah, it's like incredible how many people are already willing to do that.
I mean, you know, I have this problem as like the creator of the thing, right? Whenever anybody hits like a problem, I'm like deeply embarrassed, you know, like, oh my God, I can't believe, you know, we have this public this way, you know, like, but then, you know, but then I come back to like, we built like a bug tracker, you know, like we built a linear with this thing.
That's true. Yeah.
We have like every last feature that linear has, but it is a good, you know, partial subset of the features of linear, and in particular, like the core feature of linear, its performance. You know.
Yeah.
And not only that, it has some features that linear doesn't have. It has public bugs. It has fine-grained permissions. It loads fast, you know, when you enter a detail page. And yeah, you know, ZBugs has like 1,000 bugs and like a total of like maybe 15,000 comments, you know, so it's not like the world's most massive like bug tracker, you know, but that is the rough shape of a lot of real applications, you know, like, and so I think, you know, what you're seeing, the reason why there's a lot of people in there fighting to figure this stuff out and in early is because when you step back and you think about that, like, wow, you know, like you can build like, you know, a subset of linear with like a few people in like few months with this technology, you know, that's like a pretty, you know, like that's a really hard thing to build otherwise, a really hard thing. And so, you know, and a lot of people want to build something like that, you know, like that describes like a wide variety of SaaS applications, you know? And so if you look at that and you say, wow, this is already able to do this, and these guys worked on RepliCache before, and they're in it for the long term, and this is going to keep getting better and better, you know, like for a lot of companies that are starting something new that is roughly like a SaaS shaped thing that needs to be fast, you know, it looks like a good time to get in.
Yeah, it's funny because I generally don't have much motivation to convince people to use a certain technology because what does it matter to me? But the thing with this category is I just want as a user to have better software that I can use. So I'm like obsessed with getting more people into this because they're going to build stuff that I can use and really enjoy. It's like once you've used enough of these things, you just start hating, like the thing you were saying about GitHub issues, like it feels 10 times more painful when you're aware of what it could be like. So I'm really looking forward to even just this cohort of applications like graduating and becoming real products, and like the more that get added on over the next couple of years, I just feel like there's going to be this generation of products that just feel finally so good on the web. Like we've been chasing the native feeling for so long, and it feels like I can see that happening within Vue.
Yeah. I mean, when one of my co-founders at Attic and Rossi Corp is this guy Eric Arvidsson. He's hasn't have a presence on Twitter, but we've been working together ever since I was in college. Like, and he worked with I recruited him to Google. He's one of my oldest friends and collaborators. And when we started doing JavaScript way back in the day, doing those UI widgets, you know, what we were doing was like drop down menus, Windows scroll bars, you know, stuff like this. We were making UI widgetry because we wanted to make the web work like a real, like real native apps, be as good as real native apps. And I think like there was something way back there really interesting and deep that we didn't totally recognize, which is that like web software is client server software. And like those native apps that have that feel that you love, that, you know, when people, why can't web apps be like Winamp? You know, that was like we were always saying, you know, Winamp is amazing. You know, and like part of that is like all the stuff about JavaScript. We can solve all that. But part of it is that the web Winamp is Spotify. It's client server software. It's not local software. You know, the data is remote. And so, I mean, people always bitch about how bad web software is, and part of it is legit, you know, and part of it is solvable, but a big part of it is like networking, you know?
Yeah, it's the architecture of it. Yeah.
And a big part of the value of web software, the reason we're using it is because it's client server. You know, and so solving that, making that part as good as native software is really deep and fun problem. And like, you know, something that I feel like I didn't really go after like fully, you know, before, but like we're doing with Zero, and I'm like stoked to finally be going for it. And I think like a lot of other people, it's funny, like when you really go for something, like when we announced Zero, like the amount of just like encouragement from the community was like, it was just completely inspiring and like deeply, like it felt so good. Like people who are competitors were like, wow, you know, this is epic. Like, you know, like I'm like so glad that you guys are going for this. And we've got a lot of people involved just like for that reason.
Yeah. No, it's super exciting. And like I said, for me, it's been just, I don't know, I think I started down this path in 2020, I think. So it's been 5 years. So it's been a very long time. And just to see even just the transition from me talking about this and then it just me talking to no one, just like kind of going out the wind and nobody even like knew what I was talking about. And everyone was kind of focused somewhere else, to now like everyone gets it and it was kind of on everyone's radar. And yeah, it's cool to be able to actually like witness that transition, because I never felt like I'd been early to anything. I always felt like I arrived just a little too late. But then with this, it feels like, okay, I like actually was able to see something and follow it through.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always fun. All right. Well, anything else you wanted to chat about?
No, I mean, thanks for having me on. And I really appreciate like you pushing us. Like I've said this before, but actually like you are a big reason we did zero. Like pushing on RepliCache and like really getting us to think about like solving this problem for real. But yeah, this has been super fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's always a good time. Thanks, Aaron. Let's just stay on for like a minute, because I think when Adam left, I lost the ability, like only he can end the recording. But it's uploading in real time, so we give it like a minute, I'm sure.
It says like 99%.
Yeah.
All right.
So probably fine.
I would be like afraid to cancel it. I don't know what happens.
Well, this is a local first app, or I guess, it's doing stuff locally. It's recording locally. Oh, all right. Okay, I think we're good. We can just.
You think so?
Yeah.
So we have to close this window.
All right.
Later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.